next section that we're going to talk about today are the basics of the brain: neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, the basics. Now, I don't want you to be like my mom, who's 81 and Italian, and she kind of shuts down when I try to tell her how to use the VCR. You can actually learn this, and you need to learn this because we're talking about you again. Your brain is the greatest system ever designed in the history of the universe. Nothing even comes close. There's nobody at Cal Berkeley or Carnegie Mellon or MIT or Harvard or Stanford or NASA or the military that will ever build anything. Mr. Gates, Mr. Dell will never build anything that even comes close to the human brain. And that's just based on what we think the brain can do today. The human brain weighs 2 to 4 pounds on average. It's made up of thousands of miles of blood vessels, where obviously the blood flows through the brain, giving it oxygen that it so desperately needs. Did you know that every time your heart beats, 25% of the blood coming out of that one heartbeat goes right to your brain? We call that market share, if you want to have some fun. Did you know your brain's made up of 60% fat? Fat, F-A-T. A lot of people don't know that. If you just think about those 4 or 5 basic facts, you now know more than 95% of the American public with regard to the human brain. And you're on your way to loving your brain, because human nature is that you will not care for someone or something you don't know. But as you learn about someone, chances are you'll not only care for that person or thing, but you'll develop a nice relationship, which is what you need to do today with the human brain. You have 2 sides to your brain. We call it a left side and a right side, sometimes called 2 hemispheres. 95% or more of us, particularly we right-handers, have language distributed primarily on the left side. The other side of the brain helps us with nonverbal skills, appreciating space, finding your car in a grocery store, parking garage, excuse me, understanding and appreciating melody, tones of a song rather than the words. And it really helps you with the gestalt, not the details. Left-handers who have a mother or father who's left-handed, they have a higher probability of having language on the right side, primarily, not exclusively. And so the left side for the left-hander with a mom or dad who's left-handed would help them with spatial appreciation and tones and faces. The 2 sides of the brain are connected by a bridge of what we call white matter. And the only reason we call it white matter is because it looks white on a scan we call magnetic resonance imaging. You probably know about an MRI. That bridge permits information to flow from one side to the other all the time. Now, you may be bombarded in the media and get confused all the time whether or not men are actually different than women. You know we are. There's a reason why we have a men's room and a ladies' room, actually. And despite what you might hear, we're different. And it's a good thing we're different. When we get together, great things happen. One of the real difficulties we have out there, though, is sometimes men and women don't communicate very well. And we have some fun and discussions out there when we ask, what behavior do men and women have a difficulty with? And it's usually the women that answer, actually, communication. And it's true, we struggle a little bit on a daily basis. Where it gets serious is that corporate America is losing thousands, if not millions of dollars every year because men and women aren't communicating very well around the care planning table or the boardroom table. And marriages are breaking up because we don't communicate very well. So what I try to do in my clinical practice is explain to the man and to the woman that we're different, and as a result we communicate differently. And once we do that, we can work on how men and women communicate differently. You know, men tend to utilize one side of their brain much more than women. Men tend to be very verbal, very task-oriented, very detailed, very one step after the next. So we use one side of our brain more than women, who tend to use 2 sides of their brain. Now, women can do the same thing a man can do. They can be very task-oriented, very sequential, very detailed. But they also have the ability to do a lot of processing that's not very verbal. Sometimes we use the word emotional. I'm not sure that's the right word, but sometimes we talk about feelings. Again, I don't know that that's the right word, but that's a human way of trying to explain communication that isn't verbal. Sometimes you'll hear it described as information between the lines. It's again another maybe basic way of trying to understand. And so we have to get female brains literally to educate male brains how to pick up on some of that information. And male brains have to educate female brains, I'm going to process this better if you put it into words for me. And there's a lot of power that can come from that. We talked about how many brain cells you have. We don't really know. I've read that it's millions, if not billions. I've read that each brain cell can communicate with 10,000 other brain cells. Now, when you have billions of brain cells and each one can communicate with 10,000 other brain cells, and we have the capacity to generate new brain cells, somebody can begin to do the math here. We're not talking about your laptop computer that has a finite amount of space. And so you can really begin to appreciate this critical part of you that you need to understand, if for no other reason, that you can begin to take care of it because it really needs your care and your attention. The greatest paradox in this country, even though it is the greatest, most complicated, miraculous system ever designed in the universe, we don't pay any attention to it. That's beginning to change. Recently, I had the opportunity to go to the National Press Club, where I was on a panel sponsored by the American Society on Aging, and they were funded by the Harris Survey, polling survey group. You may have heard of Harris. And this poll, what they did was they went out and they just asked Americans, representative sample, what's the most important system you need to have health information about? And as you can well imagine, the number one was the heart. Should be. We've educated the public to say that. 2 was diabetes. 3, I believe, was cancer. Did you know, like number 7, and more accurately, only 3% of the population of the United States of America said that the most critical system in their body that they needed health information on was the brain. 3%. It was right there with sensory functions like vision and hearing. So it tells us how much we have to do to get people to understand the basics of their brain, the power of their brain, what you now know to be neuroplasticity, and how you can engage yourself in a lifelong process to promote the health of the brain.